And then there was a couple of stupid moments with me being culturally insensitive. He says, you're going to wake up naked, bleeding, and missing a kidney in a ditch somewhere in Siberia. We start riding the bus, and we're heading directly for that Tu-154. And I'm like, no, please, no. And then at the last minute, we turned hard left, and there was an American Boeing 737. And I'm like, oh, great, it's an American plane. I'm safe. There's going to be no problems now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are on the channel Happy Together with Galina Smith. And today is 19th of July 2020. And 12 years ago, a beautiful lady from Russia came having with a K1 to make happy this gentleman. And we are going not to talk about his happy life, how it was changed. I want to ask him to tell us his impressions about his first visit to Russia. Could you please?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, 2007, I entered into a correspondence with a nice young lady in Omsk that Galina helped facilitate. And the whole trip really becomes one comedy routine because it's just a series of bad events, one after the other after the other. If the trip and my experiences in Russia had been any indication, everything would have went down in flames miserably. But unfortunately, we got all the weird stuff out of the way first. Starting with the trip, this is the first time I'd flown on airlines after 9/11. I hadn't flown for several years. So the whole changes with the TSA and everything, and some of my family were interested, were really worried about me because they're like, oh, I hear it's lawless over in Russia. I hear it's this, I hear it's that. And I
want to tell you what they heard.
Well,
like you
I kind of wanted to flash back to that because it's more ironic when you get to that point. But my mother was worried about me flying, and I get from the get-go, she starts complaining. She says, "Oh, they just closed Heathrow Airport down," because she knew I was connecting through Heathrow, and instead it was somebody had drove a Land Rover with a bunch of gasoline on fire through Glasgow, Scotland. And I said, Mom, that's Glasgow. That's not Heathrow. It's not going to be a problem. And then 2 hours later down, there was a suspicious package, and they closed the airport down. And Mom's like, I told you. So basically, with the flight, was British Airways, which is usually a great airlines. Unfortunately, I had the two most arrogant people I'd ever met in my life from France sitting directly next to me. And there was a gentleman in front of me who kept I'm a tall fella, but the guy kept putting his seat back into my knees. In fact, every time we got meals on the plane, we had 2 meals, the stewardess had to ask this gentleman to raise his seat. So we get to London Heathrow, 2 hours late because of rain. We're eating up my layover for me to be able to find the Aeroflot ticket counter and get everything checked in. And once I transferred terminals and got everything situated, I could not find the ticket counter. And as I'm walking back and forth through the airport, I see a guy who's quite familiar to me because it's that idiot that kept putting his seat back into my knees. His name was Oleg. He was from Samara, and he could not find the ticket counter. So now suddenly this guy who a couple hours ago I was cussing was my new best friend because we were lost together. So we finally managed to go, and he says, I know what gate we're going to. So we went down and the nice people at Aeroflot, which, by the way, Aeroflot gets a really bad rap, but Aeroflot, every time I've flown, has been stellar. I've really enjoyed the service I got on Aeroflot. I might be the only person on the face of the planet that can say it, but every time I've flown Aeroflot has been really a good experience. So anyhow, we find the ticket counter. Not the ticket counter, but the gate. They let us on. And as soon as I get onto the plane, my first impression was kind of weird because there was this smell as I'm getting onto the plane, and it was this really strong alcohol medicinal smell. And I had no idea what that was. I'm like, well, at least they probably took care of the plane and cleaned it really well. We start to back up from the gate, and you can literally hear rain hitting the fuselage outside of the plane. And we backed up, and they shut down. Said, well, we are going to be delayed for a while. So we were delayed a good bit, and the whole time I'm nursing a headache that I had across the Atlantic. And finally we get up, we leave, We're in the air. I'm chatting with Oleg a little bit. Actually, you know, he and I got along pretty well. It came time to feed us, and my stomach had gotten weak now from my headache. So they said, "You want fish or chicken?" I said, "Well, chicken's probably the better bet." So I got chicken. I figured I'd start with my salad. I opened up the salad, and there's this huge piece of raw fish on top of the salad. And I'm like, yeah, I think I'll pass on that. So we flew a little while longer. And it was really neat because some of the places over in Eastern Europe that we flew actually had a really good view of this one huge factory town that made an impression on me. I was really impressed, you know, just this huge complex with these huge smokestacks. And I'm from a rural environment. I'm from the country. I'm a country boy. And that was kind of different for me. I hadn't seen anything like that since I'd left the Army and quit traveling. And then there was a couple of stupid moments with me being culturally insensitive. Because there was one part where there was a bright glow underneath the clouds, and I kind of, hey, Oleg, is that where Chernobyl is? Because of this bright, and he didn't find that funny, and I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm a smart guy. I'm an idiot. We get to Moscow. We land in the morning, and as we're getting off the airplane, there are 3 young guys, and there's an older guy, probably in his 50s. The guy had a ponytail and was wearing a leather jacket. And he started arguing with these kids. These kids and him are back and forth, back and forth. And twice I watched this older gentleman take his jacket off, and it looked like they were getting ready to fight. And this happened, and from what I could understand, it was from a soccer game that they had been at in England, and they'd harbored this grudge all the way across. And as we're going through passport control, I see this gentleman with the ponytail and the leather jacket. He was a diplomat. He got in the diplomat line. So I'm like, okay, well, that's a rather different look for a diplomat. That's not exactly what I would expect traveling. There were some other things going on. At this time in Russia in 2007, this was right after the United States had changed currency on the $100 bills. And they went from a smaller Ben Franklin to a larger Ben Franklin. And when I went to the bank, I had got bills I didn't specify. And when I tried to exchange money in Sheremetyevo Airport, the lady immediately took the old 100s and gave them back to me. She wanted no part of them. So I'm suddenly saying, well, I don't know how much of the money I got I'm actually going to be able to exchange, but I've got traveler's checks. So I went outside and I was waiting. In the old days, we flew into what was old Sheremetyevo 2, which was the international terminal that was made for the Olympics, and then we had to transfer to the old first terminal, which I don't even believe they use anymore. So you had to get a little ticket from Aeroflot, which would give you a free bus fare over. So I stood outside chatting with a lady who had been on the flight with me. By the way, we'd all lost our luggage. Everybody on my flight had lost their luggage who had transferred at Heathrow because Oleg, his luggage wasn't there, my luggage wasn't there, and this lady I was talking to, her luggage wasn't there, which was an interesting deal because I went over to the luggage counter, complained, or said I lost my luggage. The lady gave me a certificate to fill out. When I filled it out, she says, over there. And there was a customs thing with 2 ladies in uniform. I walked over, handed them the paper. They stamped it twice, then pointed back over to where I just came from. And I took that back over, and they said, "Oh, there's a phone number in Moscow. Call in a week or so. You'll know what's going on." So this lady and I are waiting for the bus, and I learned the first important lesson about Russia right quick. Lines don't mean anything because a bus stopped in front of me. The door's open. I'm literally talking 6 feet in front of me. Everybody from the sides went in at an angle in front of me. And I'm not the type of guy that likes to get up against anybody and, butt or push or anything. I got right to the door, and the door went shut right in my face. So at this point, I didn't understand the exchange rate yet. And there was a bus right behind that bus that you had to pay 11 rubles for. And I just was so flabbergasted. It had been a long trip already. You were already talking 16 hours into it. And I just wasn't thinking. So I went ahead and said, well, I'll grab that bus. And I rode to the other terminal. And when we got there, you immediately go through a metal detector security screening. I had change from the bus in my pocket that I had forgotten that I had. And I beeped. And this fellow who was in the MVD, or their security forces, he started reading me the riot act in both Russian and English. Davai, davai, empty your pockets. Pashli, pashli, let's go. And he's wanding me and everything. And finally we figured out that it was the coins in my pocket. And finally he says, okay, you can go. And I said, Spasiba Barney Fife, because like I said, I'm a smart aleck. And he goes, oh, who is Barney Fife? And I said, oh, he's a lawman in my country who everybody knows, and you remind me a lot of him. And which probably wasn't a smart thing to say. And probably rude of me, but at the time I'm just being an idiot on the end of a trip. So we go in, I go through the second tier of security, which was interesting. As I'm waiting in line, I had a gentleman walk up to me and he says, excuse me, is this blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't understand you. And I had to have the gentleman repeat himself 3 times. And what occurred to me after listening to him closely several times, is this the end of the queue? Well, I know enough to know that English, queue is a line. So this gentleman had been taught English by somebody with a heavy Cockney accent from England. And on top of his Russian accent, it was just hard for me to pick up. I had to start listening a lot harder once I got to Russia. Because there were people who were speaking English, but it was hard for me to pick all the different accents because they were taught English in a different accent. I go through security. 2 ladies patted me down, which I'm not particularly used to. And they started laughing at me because my face turned red. And I made the comment, well, in certain countries, we would probably be engaged now. I mean, they were not very modest. They patted me down. I came through, went to the second line to get my boarding pass, and after waiting in line roughly an hour and a half, the lady says, oh, you're too soon, come back later. So I'm now in this airport that I'm going to have to hang out in for the next, I think it was 6 hours I had a layover. I'm not really sure. And I don't have any luggage. My luggage was lost. I have a backpack, which I have a Walkman and a small video game system, a little Game Boy, which I don't even like playing, but I took it because I knew it would just be a really good waste of time for me to mess with it. And after a while, I got to thinking, well, I'm getting thirsty. So I walked over to a little convenience shop they had there in the airport, and I saw a Coca-Cola half liter for 400 rubles, and I immediately got indignant, and I said, man, I don't pay 400 anything for a Coke. I'm sorry, I'm just not paying that. And then I went back, and I actually had a little pocket translator that I could program the exchange rate in. I figured out at the time it was like 25 rubles to the dollar, and I figured all that out, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm pretty thirsty, and I guess I can swing that. So I went and got a Coke and a candy bar and hung out for a while. I went upstairs. There was a bar. They called it the Irish Pub. I did not go in there because there were already a couple of rowdy people in there, and I thought, well, this is great. I'm not even where I'm going to, and I'm going to get in trouble. No, don't want to do that. Don't want to drink because I don't want to fall asleep and miss my flight. It got closer to the time for my flight. I went back. I got my boarding pass, and they had a smoking area there. And when I walked through, there were only 2 people in the smoking area, but the entire place was full of smoke. Even though it was well ventilated, I still have to laugh about that. I guess a lot of people had just left the smoking area. And I look out the window, and here's an old Soviet-built Tu-154. And I'm quite aware of the track record, even in 2007. If you guys don't know, that was the same aircraft the Polish president and his cabinet were flying on when they crashed near Smolensk. And I said, please don't let that be my plane. Please don't let that be my plane. So we waited. They called my flight. I walked downstairs. I got on the bus, and there's that nasty medicinal smell once I got on the bus. And I'm like, hey, this is just the nastiest smell of a cleaner that you could ever imagine. We start riding the bus, and we're heading directly for that Tu-154. And I'm like, no, please, no. And then at the last minute, we turned hard left, and there was an American Boeing 737. And I'm like, oh, great, it's an American plane. I'm safe. There's going to be no problems now. We get in, we get buckled up, the plane takes off, and, normal thing with any aircraft, I hear the landing gear hit up inside. It goes thunk. And then 2 minutes later, I heard the landing gear go thunk. I'm like, well, that's weird. And then 2 minutes later, I hear the landing gear once again go thunk. And a gentleman walks out of the cockpit, walks back, takes a piece of Velcro carpet off the floor, rips it off, opens the door, and starts looking down in there. And I'm like, okay, this is not normal. Great. So, meanwhile, the lady in my row who was sitting against the window starts crossing herself. And I wasn't so worried about her. I just didn't want her to freak me out and make me scared. So I tapped the guy next to me, and I said, hey, buddy, do you speak English? And he goes, yes, I do speak English. And I'm like, please tell your wife we're going to be fine. And he says, she's not my wife, but I'll tell her. So they go back and forth in Russian for a couple seconds. She wants to know how you know. And I said, well, ask the lady which direction we're flying. And she came back Vostok, which I knew enough Russian to know Vostok is east. And I said, yes, because if we were going to make a big mess, they would have put us back towards Moscow. And oddly enough, that calmed her down. It seemed to make sense, and we flew on. So I got to talking to the guy next to me. His name was Christian. He worked in Omsk, which he was able to give me a lot of information about the city, and it was pleasant talking to him. It was a 4-hour flight, and I really enjoyed it. As we got ready to land, he says, oh, I want to tell you one thing. When we land, don't get up. I said, okay, why? He says, we have a tractor that comes out and hooks to the airplane and pulls the airplane up to closer to the terminal. I said, why do they do that? He says, well, because we have ice and snow here in the winter, and we don't want the plane to slide in. I said, but it's July. There's no ice. There's no snow. He says, well, we weren't going to lay off the tractor guy just because it was summer. And I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah, that's great. So we get there. We get into another bus, and the bus takes us literally 200 yards. And there's a big, impressive iron fence with barbed wire across the top. And I see this girl that I've seen pictures of, and she keeps peeking out from behind another girl and waving. And this is Irina. This is the girl I was going to see. And the other girl was Julia, who is Galina's daughter. And I came out, and they said, well, we'll go get your luggage. I said, I got no luggage. Everything I got's on my backpack. And Irina was acting very, very, very strange. A little giggly and everything else. Years later, I found out why. It's because her and Julie had finished off a bottle and a half of champagne waiting for me to show up.
Because they were very worried and very scary.
Well, it settled their nerves maybe a little too much.
They decided that champagne can help.
So they hail a taxi, and we go into town. My first look at a Russian city. Pardon me. And they said, oh, we're going to stop here at the market and get you some dinner. We're going to fix you some. So we went into the supermarket there, my first time in a Russian supermarket. And as I walked in the door, somebody grabbed me from behind and jerked me really, really hard. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And it's Irina, and she's like, over there. And there's these row of like gym locker baskets with keys in them. She says, your backpack has to go in there. And the ladies put their purses in there because you weren't allowed to take handbags in because I guess they were worried about pilfery, people stealing. So we walked around, and I started trying to replace a lot of my personal items. I found shave cream, but I couldn't find a razor, which I was told was uncommon. And we spent 2 days looking for a razor, which was funny. And so at first, it kind of reinforced some of those old stereotypes of the Soviet Union of going in and not being able to find what you wanted. And I'm not going to say anything. I've traveled before. You don't say insulting things about people's country. You don't, because that's pride. They have pride in their country, so I'm not going to say anything. And I'm not sure what to expect. I'm still digesting everything. So they said, oh, the apartment is here really close. Let's walk, and we'll go down to the apartment. I said, okay. So we go down around a derelict construction site where they were doing construction on Marks Prospect. We came down around the back, and the grass is about waist high. It hasn't been cut. There are 2 or 3 guys wearing wife-beater T-shirts, smoking the Baltimore Canal cigarettes, I'm not even kidding, and drinking vodka. And I'm like, well, this really doesn't look like a great neighborhood. And then we go down to the apartment. The apartment's, it was an older building, had a huge metal door on it with a magnetic lock that would beep, and then you open up the door. And so we walk inside, and the door slams shut. Now, let me go back a few weeks. Talking to one of my friends who'd known me for years, he's like, seriously, you're going to Russia, dude? And I said, yes, I'm going to Russia. He says, you know you're not smart. I said, why? He says, you're going to wake up naked, bleeding, and missing a kidney in a ditch somewhere in Siberia. Interestingly enough, I hadn't thought about that since he said it until that door slammed behind me, and I'm in this really, really, really dark hallway in front of a staircase. And then suddenly that plays in the back of my mind. And I'm like, yeah, this is funny. So we go upstairs. Julia and Irina cooked me dinner. We had pelmeni. We had okroshka soup, which I wasn't a big fan of, but a lot of people are. Cheese and salami, kielbasa, whatever you want to call it. And we sat there and we talked for a good while. And at the end, they said, well, you need to get some sleep. Plus, we also had found out that another culture shock, that the hot water was not operating in my apartment. And the reason it wasn't operating was because they have several factories that generate hot water for the city. All the hot water is piped underground, which is different than in America, where we all have hot water heaters in our house. So it shut down for a couple weeks in the summer to do maintenance. So I'm like, well, that's not a problem. You know, I can wet down, lather up, rinse off. I've been traveling now at this point probably about 30 hours. I don't care. I'm going to get clean and get some sleep. And as they're leaving, they gave me several instructions. The phone doesn't work, so don't worry about the phone. If somebody rings you from the outside trying to get in, don't answer it. And there's only one key, and we're taking it with us. Good night. And they shut the door, and I'm suddenly thinking, what? Wait a minute. There's only one key, and I don't have it. So I'm here in an apartment, not knowing where I'm at, other than I'm in Omsk in Siberia, which isn't a lot of help to me at this point. You didn't think this out too well. How did this get to this point? You know, there were a number running, a little paranoid, so there's a various number of scenarios rolling through my head. Well, you know, people could come back in while I'm asleep and take everything. This isn't smart, Dave. You don't even really know these people other than talking to them over the internet. So maybe you're making a mistake here. And so paranoia struck in. I put my passport and my traveler's checks and my cash, rolled it up in my pants, shoved it up behind the toilet where it would be hard to find. Got my shower, calmed down. Everything was cool. I laid down in bed. And about 11:30, I heard shots in the courtyard, which my wife still to this day swears was fireworks. I don't know. And she wasn't there to tell me, so I just have to go with that. About 3, 4 in the morning, I wake up and I hear arguing in the hallway, and I hear and a lady crying. I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I get up the next morning and get my first look at Russian TV, and we're goofing around. I'm goofing around. And got myself a little bit of leftovers from last night, eat. And the door coming into my apartment, when they left, they locked 2 locks. Well, there were 3 other locks on that door, and I locked them all. So I hear somebody over at the door, and I hear Irina. I look out, and it's Irina, and she goes, help me. Well, she couldn't get the other locks with the key, so I had to unlock them. And she came in, and she immediately started demanding that I have breakfast. And I'm like, I'm not hungry. No, you're going to eat. And she was so upset, she didn't think she was getting the point through, that she called Julie on her cell phone and then handed it to me. And she said, good morning, Dave. I said, good morning. She says, Irina wants you to eat. I said, I'm not hungry. I've already ate. Eat something. She's not going to leave you alone until you eat. So we ate something.
Russians always feed everybody.
Yes. I'll tell you one thing. Russians aren't stingy with the food. They're always, wonderful hosts. They always put out more than you're going to eat. And Americans are known for having big appetites anyhow, so I have no idea how they figure all that. So then we went shopping for clothes. Went to Adidas, which, and I was a big guy at the time, man. I was every bit of 350 maybe. And it was hard for me to find clothes that would fit me. But we went around town. And so I spent 2 weeks there, and I learned a lot of really interesting things. There were just a lot of things. Most people don't understand how beautiful Russia is. And I would get asked by people who would meet me, says, well, what do you think of Russia? And I said, well, Russia is different. Different is not good. Different is not bad. Different is different. We have to... talking about diversity and so forth. You've got to be able to embrace some of the differences and look at them. And the mystery cleaner, I actually found out what that was. We're riding the bus one day with Julie and Irina, and I said, what is it with you guys? What is this cleaning stuff that you use on buses, planes, and everything? And they're like, what? And I said, you don't smell that. And they started sniffing, and then they started laughing at each other and babbling really quick to each other in Russian. And I'm like, okay, let me in on the joke. She says, you don't know what this is. This is when somebody drinks way too much vodka, this is the smell when they're sweating it out of their system. And I'm like, are you serious? And they're like, yeah. And, I felt at that point, I felt stupid. I thought it was a cleaner. I didn't realize it was just all these intoxicated people close to me.
I know now why everybody asks if you do have vodka every day,
It's, but I had a really good time. I mean, there was the circus in Omsk, and to be honest, I'd read some about the history before I went there, and I've read more since. And the next next visit, I've got a list of places I want to go that I haven't went. And for those of you who don't know, that's a really historical city. It was the white capital of Russia during the Civil War. And, you know, that's one of the, I guess, I don't know if it's a myth or a running joke about looking for Kolchak's gold.
Kolchak was there was all money of Russia in Kolchak's stuff there, yep.
But they never found it, though.
Never found it, so we can't do that.
No, it could be between Omsk or Kutsk.
Somewhere in this way also, yeah.
But no, and it was really wonderful, and I owe a lot to Galina and her daughter for helping me and my wife find each other. We've been married now, it'll be 12 years in August. We have 2 wonderful sons. Oh, sometimes they're wonderful, sometimes they're not, but most of the time I'm inclined to like them. And I would say, you know, I've only told you a bit of what went on that trip. Just one thing after another, and I've been blessed since then that all the hiccups were on the road to find Irina, and you know it kind of makes everything else kind of look. You know, I'm able to look back and laugh at all this. And there were some times that I was concerned about my decisions and what I was doing, but really, it was a good experience for me. Even if Irina and I hadn't got together, it was still a very good experience for me to travel to that part of the world.
There is no any warranty. Yep.
So that's basically it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because I was laughing about waking up without your stuff.
Oh, dude,
without your kidney or something else. Yeah.
There was one point. I guess there was the one point where I went looking and they had made a mistake with Irina and they listed her as not a nice person on the internet, and it scared me for a bit. You know that okay, I don't know what I'm doing here, but. You know, and I guess it was also another good thing, guys, that my luggage was gone because I had to make some really quick decisions that I was going to have to trust Irina because I have nothing. I'm in her world. She knows everything. I know nothing. And same with Julia, that both those folks, you know, they were basically a babysitter for me for 2 weeks.
Yeah, they always do that, yeah.
And, you know, to help me find my way around because I did not speak the language. I did not understand the culture. I can't even say that, you know, I understand things any better now than what I did.
Come on in, sweetheart.
Come on, Mikey. All right. You got the other one.
Yes, I got the other one.
But yeah, it's funny. It wasn't until we were married several years, and I told Irina, I said, "Hey, this is what happened to me the first night. You guys left me in a vulnerable situation," and I said it was my own making. I said, "What would you have done if that had been?" If I had done the same to you on your first night in the USA, she said, I wouldn't have stayed. She says, I'd have went with you. I don't care where you're going. So, but my nose is wrong. I gotta go.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm sure everybody will enjoy your
have a good laugh at my expense. I laugh about it all the time. Thanks, folks.
Yeah. Thank you. Today is the best day ever. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.